They called my grandpa a dreamer, dismissing his tales of secret fortunes and ancient dangers. But his last gift, an old sea chest, proved them all wrong and plunged me into a real-life treasure hunt with a killer on my heels. My grandpa was a storyteller. He'd sit on our porch in his rickety rocking chair, the scent of pipe tobacco and old wool clinging to him like a second skin, and spin yarns that were wilder than the untamed forests he claimed to have explored. He told tales of wrestling bears in the Klondike, of outsmarting river pirates on the Mississippi, and of a secret so profound it was woven into the very DNA of our family. My parents would smile and humor him, patting my head and saying, "That's just Grandpa Arthur being Grandpa Arthur." But I believed him. Every word. I was 17 when he passed, and the world suddenly felt a lot less magical. The reading of the will was a stuffy, soul-crushing affair in a downtown office that smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. My aunt got the house. My uncle, the modest portfolio of stocks he'd carefully managed. My parents received what was left in his bank account, a sum that barely covered the funeral costs. Their faces were tight with a mixture of grief and financial anxiety. We weren't poor, but we lived on the knife's edge of making ends meet. And everyone had secretly hoped Grandpa Arthur had a little more squirreled away than he'd let on. Then the lawyer, a man with a face like a tired bloodhound, cleared his throat and looked at me over his spectacles. "And to my grandson, Alex," he read, his voice a dry monotone, "who always had the wisdom to listen to an old man's stories and the heart to believe them, I leave my old sea chest. It holds everything I ever truly valued." A heavy silence fell over the room. My mom shot me a look of pure pity. My dad just stared at his shoes, his jaw working. A chest, an old dusty, probably worthless wooden box. I could feel the collective sigh of my relatives, the unspoken thought, the old man really had lost his mind at the end. I, on the other hand, felt a strange flutter in my chest. I knew that chest. It sat at the foot of his bed my entire life, a dark, iron-bound behemoth that he'd always said had sailed the 7 seas with him. He'd never let me open it. When we got it home, it was even bigger and heavier than I remembered. My dad and I grunted and heaved it up to my bedroom, the wood scraping against the doorframe. "Well, son," Dad said, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, "there's your inheritance, probably full of old moth-eaten blankets." He was trying to be light-hearted, but the disappointment in his voice was a physical weight in the room. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and I was alone with Grandpa's legacy. The chest was magnificent. The wood was dark, almost black, and scarred with the marks of a long and violent life. Heavy iron straps studded with rusted bolts held it together, and a massive, intricate lock guarded its secrets. A small, ornate iron key was tied to the handle with a piece of twine. My hands trembled as I untied it. The metal was cold and surprisingly heavy. I slid it into the lock. For a moment it wouldn't turn, stuck fast with age and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, gritting my teeth, and with a deafening groan of protesting metal, the lock clicked open. A wave of air, smelling of cedar, salt, and time itself, washed over me. I lifted the heavy lid. My dad had been close. The top layer was indeed a set of old woolen naval blankets. Beneath them, I found his favorite briar pipe, a worn-out copy of Moby Dick, a framed, faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and a leather pouch of old coins from countries that no longer existed. It was a collection of memories, a life packed into a box. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep, aching loss for the man who had filled my childhood with wonder. I thought that was it. My inheritance was a box of sentiment, but Grandpa was always a man of secrets and layers. As I ran my hand along the bottom of the chest, my fingers brushed against a seam that shouldn't have been there. It was almost invisible, a perfect line in the wood grain. I pressed down, and a section of the floor gave way with a soft click, a false bottom. My heart hammered against my ribs. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I lifted the panel. Underneath, nestled on a bed of faded red velvet, lay a leather-bound journal, a small, heavy canvas pouch, and a rolled-up piece of what looked like treated animal hide tied with a leather cord. I untied the pouch first. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested. I tipped it over, and into my palm rolled a single gnarled, misshapen nugget of the purest, brightest gold I had ever seen. It was the size of my thumb and pulsed with a dull, inner light. It felt real, impossibly real. With trembling fingers, I unrolled the hide. It wasn't hide. It was old, yellowed parchment, cracked at the folds and smelling of dust and earth. It was a map. Hand-drawn in faded ink, it depicted a rugged stretch of mountains and forests that looked vaguely familiar, like the ranges an hour's drive from our town. There were landmarks noted in my grandfather's spidery, elegant script: Weeping Widow Falls, the Stone Sentinel, Bear Jaw Ridge. And deep in the heart of the most inaccessible-looking part of the range, a small, crudely drawn X was marked. Next to it, in letters that were bolder than the rest, were 3 words: Arthur's Folly Mine. I stared, my mind reeling. A gold mine. A secret family gold mine. It couldn't be. This had to be the final, grandest story of all, a last prank from beyond the grave. And yet, the weight of the nugget in my hand felt like an anchor to reality. I scrambled downstairs, map in one hand, nugget in the other, my voice a strangled yell. "Mom! Dad! You have to see this!" They were in the kitchen, nursing cups of coffee, the grim reality of their finances hanging between them. I burst in and spread the map on the table, placing the nugget on top of it like a trophy. It was in a secret compartment. Grandpa had a mine, a gold mine. Look! My dad picked up the nugget. He turned it over and over, his brow furrowed. "This is probably fool's gold, Alex. Pyrite. Your grandpa loved to collect rocks." He tapped the map. "And this is just one of his stories, son. He drew things like this all the time. It's a fantasy." "But the secret compartment, the journal," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "He was an eccentric old man," my mom said gently, but with a firmness that broke my heart. "He wanted to leave you one last adventure. It's sweet, honey, but it's not real. We have real problems to worry about right now." She looked away towards the pile of bills on the counter. Dejected, I trudged back to my room, the weight of their disbelief crushing me. They didn't see it, they couldn't. I was alone in this. I sat on my bed and opened the journal. The first page was a letter addressed to me, Alex. It began, "If you're reading this, you found my secret. Don't listen to the doubters. The folly is real. It made our family and it could save it again. But you must be clever and you must be brave. There are things I never told you, dangers that don't die with old men. The map will only get you so far. The first real key is a story I told you 100 times, the one about the shadow of the mountain. You remember? And Alex, be careful who you trust. People have been searching for this place for a very long time. They're not as kind as you are." A chill snaked down my spine. This wasn't a game. The shadow of the mountain. I remembered the story vaguely, something about a landmark that was only visible at a certain time of day. I looked back at the map, my eyes scanning every detail, every line my grandpa had drawn. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the corner, almost invisible against the aged parchment, was a tiny secondary drawing. It wasn't a landmark. It was a face, a gaunt, cruel face with a distinctive scar running down its left eye, and underneath it, a name, Silas Thorne. My blood ran cold. That was the name of our new neighbor, the quiet, intense man who had bought the old Miller property next door just 2 months ago. The man I'd seen watching our house from his window late at night. And as that realization hit me, I heard a floorboard creak downstairs. It wasn't my mom or my dad. Their footsteps were heavy. This was light, quiet, and deliberate. Someone was in my house. My blood turned to ice water. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Every nerve in my body screamed, my ears straining to decipher the sound from downstairs. It wasn't the familiar groan of the house settling or the heavy tread of my dad heading for a midnight snack. This was a stealthy wait, a deliberate pressure on the old floorboards of the living room, followed by the softest whisper of fabric brushing against the hallway wall. Someone was inside, moving with a predator's grace. And my parents were just one room away, oblivious, lost in their quiet grief and money worries. My first instinct was to scream, to yell a warning, but Grandpa's words from the journal echoed in my head. Be careful who you trust. People have been searching for this place for a very long time. A scream would alert the intruder, but it would also reveal my position. It would turn their quiet search into a violent confrontation. I was trapped. My eyes darted around my room, frantically searching for a weapon, a plan, anything. My baseball bat leaned in the corner. Too loud, too far away. My phone was on my nightstand. An idea sparked through the terror. I snatched it, my thumb fumbling with the screen, slick with sweat. I pulled up my dad's contact, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a jumbled, panicked message. Dad, someone in the house. Downstairs. Don't make a sound. In living room. Not joking. I hit send, the tiny whoosh of the message sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. I held my breath, praying he had his phone on him, praying he'd see it, praying he'd believe me this time. Seconds stretched into agonizing eternities. Below me, the soft sounds continued, a drawer opening, a muffled thud, the quiet rustle of papers. They were searching for something, for the map. My phone vibrated in my hand, a reply from Dad. Stay in your room, lock the door, police on the way. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. He believed me. They were safe. But then, a new cold dread seeped in. The footsteps were moving. They were leaving the living room and entering the hall. They were coming towards the stairs, towards me. I scrambled on my hands and knees, shoving the map, the journal, and the nugget deep under my bed, pushing them to the far corner against the wall. It was a flimsy hiding spot, but it was all I had. I crept to my door, my ear pressed against the cool wood. I could hear the intruder on the stairs now, each step a carefully placed, almost silent pressure. This was no common burglar. A burglar would be loud, frantic, grabbing valuables and getting out. This person was methodical, a hunter. I twisted the lock on my doorknob, the click echoing like a thunderclap in my own ears. I held my breath, waiting for the footsteps to stop, for a shoulder to slam against the door, but they didn't. They reached the top of the landing and paused. I could feel them, a malevolent presence just on the other side of the thin barrier of wood, listening, waiting. I backed away from the door, grabbing the heaviest textbook from my desk, holding it like a shield. Then a shadow appeared in the crack of light under my door. It blotted out the dim glow from the hallway, a solid, dark shape. The doorknob, the one I had just locked, began to turn, slowly, silently. My blood ran cold. He was picking the lock. I saw the brass nub of the lock twist with an unnerving smoothness, a quiet snick, announcing my defeat. The door was unlocked. My mind raced. I was cornered. I braced myself, ready to swing the textbook, to scream, to fight with everything I had. The door began to creak open. I saw a sliver of the hallway, then a dark sleeve, a hand. My body tensed for the impact, for the fight of my life. And then, in the distance, a siren wailed. Faint at first, then rapidly growing louder, splitting the night air. The hand on the door froze. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the door was silently pulled shut. The footsteps retreated, no longer stealthy but impossibly fast, a frantic, near-silent rush down the stairs. I heard the back door open and close with a soft thud. And then silence. A silence more terrifying than the noise that had preceded it. Moments later, my dad was at my door, hammering on it. "Alex! Alex, are you okay?" I stumbled forward and threw it open. He and my mom stood there, their faces pale masks of fear. Red and blue lights flashed through the downstairs windows, painting the walls in frantic strokes of color. The police came and went. They found pry marks on the back door lock and a single set of muddy boot prints on the kitchen floor. But nothing was stolen. Not the TV, not my mom's jewelry, nothing of obvious value. To them, it was a botched burglary, the thief scared off by the approaching sirens. But I knew better. My dad knew better. After the officers left, we sat in the kitchen, the three of us huddled around the table as if it were a campfire. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep, trembling dread. "He didn't take anything," my mom whispered, her voice shaky. "He wasn't looking for the TV, honey," my dad said, his voice grim. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new understanding, a terrible regret. The chest, the map, that's what he was after. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I should have listened to you, Alex. I remember your grandpa mentioning a name years ago, a partner he had back in his prospecting days, a bad falling out. He said the man was dangerous, obsessed. He called him Silas." My blood froze. "Silas Thorne," I breathed. "Our new neighbor." Dad's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Thorne, the man who moved in a few months ago? Arthur told me he'd lost track of him 50 years ago, thought he was dead." It all clicked into place. Thorne hadn't stumbled upon us by accident. He'd been watching, waiting for Grandpa to pass, waiting for his chance to find what he believed was his. The drawing on the map wasn't just a warning, it was an identification. My grandfather knew Thorne would come looking. I retrieved the journal and the map from under my bed and spread them out on the kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. We had to figure this out. We had to move first. We pored over the map, but it was just geography without context. It was the journal that held the key. I flipped through the brittle pages, scanning my grandfather's looping script, searching for anything about the shadow of the mountain. I found it on a page tucked near the back, under a sketch of a peculiar-looking rock formation that resembled a jagged tooth. "The old man of the mountain only reveals his secrets when the sun bows its head to the equinox," he had written. "At dusk, for a fleeting moment, his shadow stretches forth, and its longest finger points the way. The true entrance isn't on any map of the earth, but on a map of light and shadow." The autumnal equinox. I grabbed my phone and frantically searched the date. My heart plummeted. The autumnal equinox was tomorrow. We had less than 24 hours. We had to go, and we had to go now. As dawn began to break, my dad started gathering supplies, flashlights, ropes, whatever meager hiking gear we had in the garage. A grim determination had settled over him. This was real. The danger was real, and the potential reward was the only thing that could pull our family back from the brink. As I stood on the front porch, the first rays of morning sun warming my face, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could beat Thorne to it. And then I saw it, placed squarely in the center of the top step, right where Grandpa's rocking chair used to sit. It was a miner's pickaxe. It was old, the wooden handle weathered and gray, the iron head rusted a deep, angry red. It was a message, a threat, and stuck into a crack in the handle was a small, folded piece of paper. My hand trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. There were only 4 words written in a sharp, aggressive hand. "I'll see you there." The pickaxe was a declaration of war. It lay on our porch not as a tool, but as a promise of violence, a symbol of the raw, brutal claim Silas Thorne felt he had on my grandfather's secret. The note wasn't a taunt. It was a statement of fact. He wasn't just following us. He was racing us, and he was confident he would win. The quiet suburban morning, with its chirping birds and the distant hum of the first commuters, felt like a thin veil stretched over a pit of vipers. My dad saw the pickaxe from the doorway. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a stony mask of fury and fear. He snatched the note from my hand, his knuckles white. "He was here again," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "He was right here." He looked out towards Thorne's house, a neat little bungalow that now seemed to exude a palpable aura of menace. The curtains were drawn, but I could feel his eyes on us. There was no more discussion, no more hesitation. The threat had solidified our resolve into something hard and sharp. We weren't just searching for a potential fortune anymore. We were running for our lives, trying to claim the one thing that might give us the power to escape a man who clearly had no boundaries. Mom, her face etched with a terror she was trying desperately to hide for our sake, packed a bag with food and water, her movements quick and jerky. "You can't go alone," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's dangerous," "which is exactly why you need to stay here," Dad countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Keep the doors locked. Don't answer for anyone. Call the police if you see his shadow on the lawn. We'll be faster, just the two of us. We'll get in, get what we can, and get out. We have the map. He's just guessing." But we all knew that was a lie. Thorne wasn't guessing. He'd had 50 years to nurse his obsession, to study my grandfather, to learn the land. He probably knew those mountains better than we knew our own backyard. Within the hour, we were in my dad's beat-up pickup truck, heading east towards the jagged spine of the mountains that loomed on the horizon. The map was spread on the dashboard between us, the gold nugget resting on it like a paperweight, its dull gleam a constant reminder of what was at stake. The silence in the truck was thick with unspoken fear. Every car that appeared in the rearview mirror was a potential threat. Every shadow on the road a trick of the light that made my heart leap into my throat. We drove for 2 hours, leaving the neat grid of suburbia behind for winding country roads that eventually dissolved into gravel. And then, finally, a dirt track that seemed to be actively trying to reclaim its place in the wilderness. Dad navigated the ruts and potholes with a grim focus, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they seemed to have fused with it. We were following Grandpa's map now, matching the crudely drawn landmarks to the real world. We passed Weeping Widow Falls, a thin cascade of water that clung to a sheer rock face, and navigated a treacherous pass he'd labeled Bear Jaw Ridge. The landscape grew wilder, more imposing, the trees thicker, the silence broken only by the cawing of crows. Finally, the track ended at a dilapidated wooden sign, so weathered the words were almost illegible. St. Jude National Forest, no trespassing, unstable terrain. "This is it," Dad said, killing the engine. "This is as far as the truck goes. We're on foot from here." He pointed towards a massive, solitary peak that dominated the skyline, and that must be the Stone Sentinel. We shouldered our packs, the weight of our meager supplies feeling insignificant compared to the weight of our mission. Dad had his old hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. He'd cleaned it before we left, his movements precise and methodical. The sight of it was both comforting and terrifying. The hike was brutal. There was no trail, just a relentless uphill battle against tangled undergrowth, loose scree, and the oppressive silence of the ancient forest. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves in the canopy above sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Was that the wind, or was it Thorne, moving through the trees with the same ghostly silence he'd used in our house? We pushed ourselves relentlessly, fueled by fear and the dwindling afternoon light. We had to reach the spot Grandpa had described in his journal, the place where we could see the old man of the mountain before dusk. After what felt like an eternity of sweat and exhaustion, we emerged from the dense tree line onto a rocky outcrop, and there it was. Across a deep wooded valley stood the formation from Grandpa's journal. It was an uncanny natural sculpture of rock, weathered by millennia of wind and rain into the unmistakable profile of a craggy ancient face, staring stoically out at the horizon. The old man of the mountain. We made it. I gasped, collapsing onto a flat rock, my lungs burning. Dad didn't relax. He scanned the surrounding woods, his hand resting on the stock of his rifle. "We're not the only ones," he said, his voice low. I followed his gaze. Far below us, on the other side of the valley, I saw a flicker of movement. It was a man dressed in dark clothing, moving with an unnatural speed and purpose through the trees. Even from this distance, I knew it was him. Silas Thorne. He was on the wrong side of the valley, but he was closing in. "He doesn't have this vantage point," Dad muttered, more to himself than to me. "He's just searching the base. He doesn't know about the shadow." The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. We watched, our hearts pounding in unison, as the shadows in the valley began to lengthen, stretching like long, dark fingers across the landscape. We positioned ourselves exactly where Grandpa's sketch indicated we should be. The anticipation was unbearable. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then it happened. As the top edge of the sun touched the distant horizon, the shadow of the old man of the mountain detached itself from the jumble of other shadows and began its crawl across the opposite slope. It was majestic, eerie, a living thing made of darkness. We watched, mesmerized, as it grew longer and longer, and then we saw it. A single distinct outcropping of rock on the shadow's profile, the longest finger from Grandpa's journal, began to creep towards a specific spot on the mountainside. A sheer, unremarkable cliff face, covered in moss and ivy. The shadow's finger touched the cliff, and for a fleeting, magical moment, it pointed directly to a small, dark cleft in the rock that had been completely invisible just moments before. It was a cave entrance, perfectly concealed by the natural contours of the mountain. "That's it!" I yelled, pointing. "The entrance!" The magic of the moment was shattered by a sharp crack that echoed through the valley. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of rock breaking. Down below, Thorne had stopped. He was looking up, not at the shadow, but directly at us. He couldn't have known the secret of the shadow, but he'd seen our excitement, seen where we were pointing. He'd seen the entrance. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but holding something that glinted in the last rays of sunlight, a pair of binoculars. A cold, triumphant smile spread across his face, a chilling expression visible even from half a mile away. He then turned and began scrambling up the cliffside towards the entrance with the agility of a mountain goat. "He'll get there first," I panicked. "No, he won't," Dad said, his voice a grim promise. "We're closer as the crow flies." He pointed to a steep, treacherous-looking slope of loose rock and gravel that led directly from our outcrop down into the valley. "It's faster, but it's dangerous. We go now." We half ran, half slid down the scree slope, sending a cascade of rocks clattering down ahead of us. It was a controlled fall, a reckless, desperate race against the dying light and the relentless man hunting us. We reached the valley floor, lungs screaming, legs shaking, and plunged back into the dark woods, fighting our way through thorny branches that tore at our clothes and skin. We finally burst out of the woods at the base of the cliff. Above us, maybe 100 feet up, was the dark slit of the cave entrance. And about 30 feet below it, we could hear the scrape of boots on rock. Thorne was almost there. Dad found handholds in the rock face and began to climb. "Stay right behind me, Alex! Don't look down!" I followed, my fingers raw, my muscles screaming in protest. It was a near vertical climb, our only holds the cracks in the rock and thick roots of ivy. I could hear Thorne's labored breathing getting closer and closer. We were going to meet at the entrance. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We scrambled over the final ledge and collapsed into the mouth of the cave. It was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and cold stone. We were there. We'd made it. Dad flicked on his flashlight, its beam cutting a sharp white cone through the oppressive darkness. The beam landed on a man standing not 10 feet away from us. It was Silas Thorne. He wasn't behind us on the cliff. He was already inside, waiting. He must have known another way in. He held a modern, high-powered lantern, which cast a wide, brilliant circle of light, and in his other hand he held a revolver, aimed squarely at my father's chest. "I knew old Arthur would leave his brat a map," Thorne hissed, his voice like grinding stones. The scar down his face was a livid, angry line in the lantern light. "Took you long enough. Now hand it over. The map, the journal, all of it. Your little treasure hunt is over." The world narrowed to the beam of my dad's flashlight and the unwavering black hole of the revolver's muzzle. Thorne's eyes, chips of obsidian in his weathered face, flickered between my father and me. The air in the cave was thick and cold, each breath a sharp sting in my lungs. My dad stood frozen, his rifle hanging uselessly at his side. He slowly raised his hands, a gesture of universal surrender. "Silas," Dad said, his voice surprisingly calm, though I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "It's been a long time. You shouldn't have come here." A dry, rasping laugh escaped Thorne's lips. "Shouldn't have? This place is as much mine as it was Arthur's. He cut me out, left me with nothing while he built his life on our discovery. I've waited 50 years for this. 50 years dreaming of the day I'd come back and claim what's mine. I'm not leaving empty-handed." His gaze hardened, the gun steady. "Now, the map. Give it to me." My dad didn't move. "There's nothing here for you, Silas. Arthur took it all out years ago. The vein ran dry. That's why he called it Arthur's Folly. It was a joke. It's empty." Thorne's smile was a cruel slash across his face. "Arthur was a lot of things, but he was never a liar. Not about gold. He was a sentimental old fool who loved his stories and his secrets more than anything. He'd never empty this place. He'd leave it just like this, a legacy for his family. For the boy." His eyes locked onto me. "The boy who he filled with stories. Now, for the last time, give me the map." Slowly, carefully, I reached into my jacket. My fingers closed around the folded parchment. My hand was trembling so badly I could barely pull it out. I held it up, a fragile truce offering in the suffocating darkness. "Put it on the ground," Thorne commanded, "and the journal, and the nugget. Slide them over." I did as he said, placing the artifacts of my inheritance on the damp cave floor. My dad gave me a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning I didn't understand. I pushed them with the toe of my boot, and they skidded across the stone, stopping a few feet from him. Thorne never took his eyes off us. He bent his knees, his gun still trained on my dad, and snatched up the map with his free hand. He unrolled it, his eyes scanning it greedily in the lantern light. A look of triumph transformed his features. "Yes," he whispered, "it's all here. Just as I remembered." He glanced at the journal, and the old man's notes to go with it. Perfect. He had what he wanted. For a split second, I thought he might just leave us. But the look in his eyes wasn't just greed. It was 50 years of festering hatred. We weren't loose ends he could afford to leave. "You know," Thorne said, his voice conversational, chillingly so, "Arthur always said this mine was clever, full of his little tricks and traps. He was paranoid even back then, worried someone might follow him." He took a step back, deeper into the cave, gesturing with the revolver. "Let's go see what he was hiding, shall we? You two in front." My heart hammered against my ribs. He was taking us deeper into the mine. There was no way we were coming out alive. Dad took a step forward, putting himself slightly in front of me. "The boy has nothing to do with this, Silas. This is between you and Arthur. Let him go." Thorne laughed again, a sound that was utterly devoid of humor. "The boy has everything to do with this. He's Arthur's blood. He's the reason I'm finally here. Now move, or I'll put a bullet in your leg and you can watch the boy find the gold for me." We had no choice. Dad turned and started walking, his flashlight beam bouncing off the damp, narrow walls of the tunnel. I followed, every nerve screaming. The tunnel was clearly man-made, the rock bearing the telltale scars of pickaxes and chisels. but it was old, with thick wooden beams, slick with moisture, bracing the ceiling at regular intervals. The air grew colder, heavier, smelling of wet rock and something else, a faint metallic tang. We walked for what felt like miles, the tunnel twisting and turning. Thorn was right behind us, his lantern casting our long, dancing shadows on the walls ahead. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, occasionally directing us to take a side tunnel or avoid a section that looked unstable. He wasn't using the map now, he was using his memory. Finally, the narrow tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous space. My dad's flashlight beam struggled to find the far walls. It was a natural cavern that had been expanded, the ceiling soaring 30 feet above our heads. In the center of the cavern, a deep, dark chasm split the floor, spanned by a single rickety-looking rope bridge. On the other side of the chasm, another tunnel entrance was visible. "There," Thorn said, a hungry edge to his voice. "The treasury. Arthur always was a dramatic fool. He built his own bridge of Khazad doom." He shoved the revolver into my dad's back. "Across. You first." My dad walked to the edge of the chasm and tested the bridge with his foot. The ropes groaned in protest. It looked ancient, the wooden slats slick with mildew, some of them cracked and broken. A single misstep would send you plunging into the darkness below. He took a deep breath and started across, moving slowly, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. I followed, my eyes glued to the swaying planks, my knuckles white as I gripped the coarse ropes on either side. The chasm was terrifyingly deep. Our lights couldn't find the bottom. All I could hear was the creak of the bridge and the drip, drip, drip of water from somewhere in the vast darkness. We made it to the other side, our legs trembling with relief. Thorn followed, crossing the bridge with a confident stride that spoke of a man with no fear. He herded us into the new tunnel. This one was different. It was shorter, ending in a solid wall of rock. A dead end. "What is this?" Thorn growled, his confidence wavering for the first time. "Where is it?" My dad swept his flashlight beam over the rock face. "I told you, Silas, it's a fool's errand. There's nothing here." But my grandfather was a man of stories and secrets. My eyes scanned the wall, remembering the journal. The map will only get you so far. It wasn't just about geography, it was about puzzles. I saw it then, a series of carvings in the rock, almost lost to the erosion of time and damp. They were symbols, not letters. A bear, a river, a mountain, a star. They were icons from the wild tales he used to tell me. "It's a lock," I whispered, pointing. "A combination lock." Thorn shoved me forward. "What?" "Talk sense, boy." "Grandpa's stories," I said, my mind racing. He always told them in the same order. It was the story of his life, his journey to the West. The bear he fought in the Rockies, the river he rafted down, the mountain where he made his fortune, and the star he followed home. You have to press them in the right order. Thorn's eyes lit up with a crazed understanding. He slammed the butt of his gun against my back. "Do it. Now." My hands shaking, I reached out and pressed my palm against the carving of the bear. Nothing. I pressed the river. Nothing. My heart sank. Was I wrong? Then I remembered. He never started with the bear. He always started with the star, the North Star that guided him. I pressed the star. A low grinding sound echoed from deep within the rock. I pressed the bear, then the river, then the mountain. With each press, the grinding grew louder. After I touched the mountain, a deep seam appeared in the wall, and a section of solid rock, a perfectly cut door, began to swing slowly inward. A wave of air, dry and untouched for decades, washed over us. Thorn pushed past me, his lantern held high. The room beyond wasn't a mine, it was a vault. It was small, no bigger than my bedroom, and lined with wooden shelves. On the shelves were dozens of heavy canvas sacks, all stenciled with the initials AF, and stacked in the corner were wooden crates filled to the brim with raw, untamed gold. Nuggets, veins shot through quartz, piles of glittering dust. It was more wealth than I could possibly comprehend. It was a dragon's hoard. "Finally," Thorn breathed, a sound of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. He dropped the map and journal and stepped into the vault, running his hands through a crate of nuggets, letting them cascade through his fingers. He had forgotten us completely, lost in his 50-year-old dream. It was our only chance. My dad caught my eye and gave a sharp, downward nod towards the rope bridge. He mouthed the word, "Run." We backed away silently, turning to flee. But as we turned, my foot kicked something on the floor. It was the miner's pickaxe Thorn had left on our porch, which he must have brought with him. It clattered loudly on the stone floor. Thorn spun around, his eyes wild, his face contorted with rage at being pulled from his reverie. He raised the revolver. But my dad was already moving. He didn't run for the bridge. He lunged towards the wall next to the stone door, where a thick, heavy lever was set into the rock. It was the mechanism for the door. With a desperate roar, he threw all his weight against it. The grinding sound started again, much faster this time. The massive stone door began to swing shut. Thorn screamed in fury and fired the gun. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet ricocheting off the wall inches from my head. He fired again, but the door was already closing, cutting off his line of sight. It slammed shut with a boom that shook the entire mountain, sealing Silas Thorn and his 50-year obsession inside my grandfather's tomb. A heavy, profound silence fell, and then, from the other side of the stone door, we heard a new sound. It was a faint, rhythmic ticking. The ticking was quiet at first, almost imperceptible beneath the ringing in my ears from the gunshots. But in the sudden, absolute silence of the tunnel, it grew louder, more insistent. It was a mechanical, deliberate sound, a countdown. My dad and I stared at the seamless rock wall that had just entombed Silas Thorn, our faces pale in the wavering beam of the flashlight. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. Dad's eyes were wide with a horrifying realization. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. "Arthur's folly," he breathed, the words laced with a new, terrible meaning. It wasn't because the mine was empty, it was a trap. A final, grand trap. He pulled me back towards the rope bridge. "Run, Alex! Now!" The ticking seemed to accelerate, echoing in the narrow tunnel, a frantic heartbeat counting down to oblivion. We didn't need any more encouragement. We scrambled back towards the chasm, our feet slipping on the damp stone. Thorn's lantern lay on the ground where he'd dropped it, casting an eerie, fixed light on the scene. I risked a glance back at the stone door. My grandfather had been a storyteller, a man of layers and dramatic reveals. This was his final punchline. Thorn hadn't just been locked in a vault. He'd been locked in a tomb of his own making, a self-triggered mausoleum. We reached the rope bridge. "Don't stop! Don't look back! Just go!" Dad yelled, shoving me forward. I launched myself onto the bridge, the rotting plank swaying violently under my weight. I didn't dare look down into the inky blackness. I just focused on the other side, my hands raw, my lungs burning. The ticking was getting louder, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, through the very rock of the mountain itself. I was halfway across when the first explosion hit. It wasn't a loud bang, but a deep, gut-wrenching whump that seemed to come from the core of the mountain. The entire cavern shuddered. A shower of dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling. The bridge bucked like a living thing, and I lost my footing, my body slamming against the ropes, the chasm yawning beneath me. "Keep moving!" Dad screamed from behind me. He was on the bridge now, his weight adding to the violent swaying. Another, more powerful explosion tore through the rock. A section of the ceiling in the main cavern collapsed with a deafening roar, sending a plume of thick, choking dust billowing towards us. The tunnel entrance we had just come from vanished behind a curtain of falling rock. The far side of the chasm was only 20 feet away. We scrambled, clawed, and pulled our way across, our movements clumsy and desperate. I felt the solid rock of the ledge beneath my hands and hauled myself onto it, collapsing in a heap. Dad was right behind me. He threw his rifle onto the ledge and was pulling himself up when a third massive explosion ripped the air apart. The blast originated from the treasury, a colossal force that blew the stone door off its ancient hinges. A wave of superheated air and rock shrapnel tore through the cavern. The rope bridge, its anchor points shattered, snapped with the sound of a giant whip crack. I watched in horror as the section my dad was clinging to whipped downwards into the abyss. He yelled my name, a single desperate cry that was swallowed by the roaring chaos. For a heart-stopping second, all I saw was empty air where he had been. Then I saw his hands, his fingers scrabbling for a hold on the very edge of the cliff. "Dad!" I screamed, crawling to the edge. His face was chalky with dust, his eyes wide with terror. He was dangling over the abyss, his boots scrabbling for purchase on the sheer rock face. The entire cavern was groaning, threatening to collapse around us. "My rifle!" he yelled over the din. "The strap!" I grabbed the hunting rifle. The leather strap was thick and strong. I braced myself, digging my heels into the loose rock, and extended the rifle down to him. His fingers found the strap, and he wrapped it around his wrist. "Pull!" he roared. I pulled with every ounce of strength I had, my muscles screaming, my feet sliding toward the edge. The weight was too much. I was losing him. Then a new wave of adrenaline surged through me, born of pure terror and love. I wasn't going to let him fall. I wasn't going to lose him. I gave one final, desperate heave. He found a foothold, and with a grunt, he scrambled over the edge, collapsing beside me, coughing and gasping in the thick, dust-filled air. We didn't have time for relief. The mountain was coming down around us. We grabbed our flashlights and plunged into the exit tunnel, the one that led back to the outside world. Behind us, the cavern collapsed completely with a final, earth-shattering groan, sealing the mine, the gold, and Silas Thorne's remains forever. We stumbled through the dark, winding tunnels, running on pure adrenaline. The air was thick with dust, making every breath a painful effort. We finally saw it, a small gray patch of light ahead. Freedom. We burst out of the cave entrance, the one concealed by the shadow, and collapsed onto the mountainside, gulping in the clean, crisp night air. The sun was long gone, replaced by a brilliant canopy of stars, the same stars my grandpa had probably looked up at from this very spot. We were alive. We were battered, bruised, and empty-handed, but we were alive. The gold was gone, buried under 1,000,000 tons of rock. My grandfather's secret was safe forever. We made the long, silent hike back to the truck in the dark. There was nothing to say. The magnitude of what had just happened was too immense for words. We had faced death, stared into the abyss, and somehow we had survived. When we pulled into our driveway just before dawn, my mom flew out the front door. She threw her arms around us, tears streaming down her face, not even caring that we were covered in dirt and grime. We were home. We were safe. In the days that followed, life felt surreal. We told the police a sanitized version of the story, that we'd gone hiking, gotten lost, and caught in a rock slide. They searched for Silas Thorne for a while, but eventually he was just declared another missing person swallowed by the wilderness. The pickaxe on our porch was our only proof that any of it had been real. We were back where we started, living on the edge of making ends meet. The pile of bills on the counter, a stark reminder of our reality. The family fortune was a ghost, a story. But something had changed. The cloud of quiet desperation that had hung over our house was gone. We had faced something terrible together and survived. My dad, who had been worn down by worry, seemed straighter, stronger. My mom's constant anxiety had been replaced by a fierce, protective calm. About a week later, I was cleaning out my pack from the disastrous trip. As I emptied the last pocket, my fingers brushed against something hard and heavy. I pulled it out. It was the single gnarled nugget of gold, the one Grandpa had left in the chest. In the chaos, I had completely forgotten it was in my pocket. I held it in my palm. It wasn't a life-changing fortune. It wouldn't pay off the mortgage or fund my college education. But as the morning light caught its surface, I realized it was worth more than all the gold buried in that mountain. It was proof. It was a promise. It was the final, tangible piece of my grandfather's story. I took it downstairs. My parents were in the kitchen, going over their budget at the table, the same worried expressions back on their faces. I walked up to them and placed the nugget on the table between them. They both stared at it. It sat there, a lump of pure, raw gold, a relic from an impossible adventure. My dad picked it up, his expression unreadable. He turned it over and over in his hand just as he had the first time. But this time, he wasn't looking at a piece of pyrite. He was looking at survival. He was looking at the price of our family's safety. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine, carefree smile I'd seen in years. He looked at my mom, and she smiled back, a tear tracing a clean path through the worry on her face. Then he looked at me. "Your grandpa always said he left you everything he ever truly valued," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He tossed the nugget in the air and caught it. He just had a funny way of showing it. The gold wasn't the treasure. The adventure, the story, the proof that our seemingly ordinary family was part of something extraordinary. That was the inheritance. We didn't have the mine anymore, but we had each other, forged stronger in the heart of a mountain, and we had one hell of a story to tell. Grandpa Arthur would have loved that.